Guys, welcome to the Prophecy Pros podcast. We are so excited today to welcome Doug Hershey. And Doug has written this incredible book called Jerusalem Rising, Ancient Prophecy, Modern Lens. This is a pictorial really view or really a walkthrough of Jerusalem compared then and now. And there are some compelling photographs that you're going to see once you get the book. But Doug, welcome to the Prophecy Pros podcast.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, we're so excited about this. You know, I think I saw your first book, Israel Rising, at maybe pre-trib conference or one of the other conferences a couple years ago. And I was like, why has nobody done this before? Taking, photographs from before Israel's rebirth and then to what it's looking like now. So tell us a little bit about both books and kind of what led to you to kind of come up with this concept and how the Lord made you bring it all together and make it happen.
Yeah, I own a tour company called Ezra Adventures, and it was actually at the very beginning, it was what I thought would be a way to pull some more advertising into the tour company. It was some then and now photography, but I spend a lot of time in Israel. Prior to COVID, I'm living in Israel probably 6 or 7 months of the year.
Wow.
So I know the land, I know the cities, and I've seen a lot of things even just change just in the short amount of time that I've been there. And so part of that whole formation with Israel Rising with the first book was really just being there and seeing a lot of the landscape change on my own. And it was about that time I was reading in Ezekiel 36 when it talks about that when the Jewish people are out of the land, it's desolate and empty, and when they return, that the branches will put forth fruit, the land will be cultivated and sown, waste and forgotten cities will be rebuilt. And I began just sort of my own sort of investigation, thinking like, this might bring some people into the tour company, in terms of like putting some of these things together, of saying is what we're seeing right now really what the prophets talked about, and then since then, like really a lot of this documentation, a lot of this research and photo work has really become my life.
I love in your first book you talk about Mark Twain and Innocents Abroad, and we've talked about that a little bit before, but not much. So share with our listeners a little bit about that. Like, it was almost like God ordained this trip that we didn't know would be kind of official chronicling of how desolate the land was when the Jewish people were away from the land. And then now you compare that now. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, in Israel Rising, one of the aspects I have in there towards the back of the book, and it kind of ties in with what you're asking about with Mark Twain, is that there's quotes from Christians, Muslims, and Jews for almost every century for the last 2,000 years describing what the land looked like.
Oh, wow.
And so by the time that Mark Twain shows up in 1867, he's basically, we'll talk a little bit about it with Jerusalem Rising. I have the quote in there as well, but he talks about Jerusalem. He's like, this is it's dreary, desolate, and empty. It's a pauper town, and I wouldn't want to live here.
Wow.
That's from 1867. And so what's cool about Jerusalem Rising, the book that's here in front of us, is that we have photographs that predate 1867. We have some of the oldest photos of Jerusalem ever taken from 1844, 1850s, 1860s. So when you put those two books together and you're reading about Mark Twain in 1867, and he's complaining about how ugly Jerusalem is, we've got photos in Jerusalem Rising that we can go back to and go, okay, he wasn't exaggerating. This place is a dump. Like, there's nothing exciting about Jerusalem at that time.
So how do you even identify, how do you find those old photos? I mean, where do you begin?
I'm often asked that question. I kind of hesitate because it's funny, as if I have a secret access to like the Israeli Antiquities Authorities, or I'm like thumbing through files at the Smithsonian. But the real answer is I spent a lot of time online, just scrolling old photos, and the Library of Congress has a bunch of stuff that you can get real specific. But I kind of knew what I was looking for, and because of the amount of time that I live in Israel, prior to COVID, I know the land, and I know by looking at the old photos, I know the region.
I've stood there before.
Exactly. I know that I know this town, but I'm not quite sure where this is at, and I know it looks different, and so I had a general idea, and then at that point, once I was able to kind of shrink down my specific photos that I wanted to use. At that point, it became sort of like a treasure hunt of like trying, how do I find this exact location to stand on the spot to recreate some of these
photos. That's the amazing thing of the book.
I was wondering about that myself, just how do you even find that camera angle, that frame? as you do that? Was it trial and error? Did you find that some of them were off, you had to go back and do it again, or what?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, I used pro photographers for both of them, so I didn't shoot the actual photos, but I did the research and knew the locations and put everything together. But in both of the books, I have these short little blurbs called personal encounters, where it kind of documents some of that. So one story in particular from Israel Rising, I have this old photo from 1880, and I write this story in Israel Rising, where it's this barren landscape of just outside of Jericho, and there's this little stone arch, from 1880. I'm looking at it and I'm going, how am I ever going to find that? And so we ended up going into to a market where there's a bunch of old guys, like in every culture, a bunch of old guys sitting around reading the newspaper, arguing, drinking coffee,
right.
And I show them this old picture, and kind of through broken English, and thinking like,
there's no way.
This is broken down in 1880,
right.
And he takes one look at it and he goes, "Oh, that's the old sugar mill over here around the corner." So he ends up hopping in the van, and he takes us right to the place. It was amazing. So there was a lot of these really cool, almost divine encounters of the right place, the right person taking us to the right place.
Gosh,
but it really was like a treasure hunt. It was so fun.
That's exciting, and Jeff and I talk about this quite a bit because we're holding on for dear life with Prophecy Pros and with our prophecy books. It's almost like God, anybody who's trying to shine a light on what God's doing now and the super sign of Israel becoming a nation again and all the little prophecies associated with that, it's almost like he's saying, okay, yes, this is stuff people need to know about now. So like you said, there's just these divine appointments where he opens these unexpected doors. What else did you see along in terms of that as a journey in doing these books? Was there a lot of barriers, or did God just say, yes, do it, and just kind of open up the door wide open?
Oh man, well, I mean, there were certainly days where it was just like, what am I doing? Well, I don't even know where I'm lost right now. I don't even know where I'm at. Is this even? Is this even worth the time? Mm-hmm. But then there was some specific times where, you're standing on the right location where some curious photographer from 150 years ago was taking a picture of a desolate city that was a dump. Mm-hmm. And now, we're looking at something from the exact same angle, and I document some of this in Jerusalem Rising. Some of these photos from 1844, the oldest photos of Jerusalem ever taken, they've never been recreated before, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So, and we shot them in 2019, so that's 175 years. Wow. So, in a couple of these sites overlooking Jerusalem, I'm standing in the exact site or the exact location that some photographer with these huge trunks, and think about photography 175 years ago.
Seriously.
And just looking at the city of Jerusalem, going like, when the Bible talks about that he's going to rebuild the waste and forgotten places and multiply his people back to the land, Jerusalem is a prime example of that. It was a wasteland, and that in 1844 there was an Ottoman census that was done of the Ottoman Empire that included Jerusalem, that documented, and I have this info in Israel Rising, that said that there's only 15,000 people living in Jerusalem.
Goodness.
And the majority of them were Jewish.
Wow.
In 1844, and today there's well over 1 million in Jerusalem as a whole. That's massive multiplication in a way that city has never seen ever before, and the prophets foretold it.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Wow, that's incredible. So this book really is like a photographic documentation of Bible prophecy. Is really
exactly,
and it's like you read our books, and Todd does artwork and illustrations and stuff. This is a whole nother avenue of helping people be convinced of really the apologetic of prophecy. It's a convincing argument to say, God said this, and guess what? This is not by coincidence. It really did happen, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that's really special to me as a way to help connect people with Bible prophecy is that in general, when you talk about Bible prophecy, most sort of the average person will think, we're speculating about something on down the road that might happen, or what might this look like, or what that might be. What we're doing is documenting what's happening right now. So the series is called the Ancient Prophecy Modern Lens series. So we're taking an ancient prophecy, which happens to be straight out of the scriptures, and Bible prophecy aside, there's no other people group that has any type of ancient writings that foretell what's going to happen a couple thousand years down the road to the land, to the people, to them returning. Nobody but the Jewish people. It's all in the scriptures. And then we look at a bunch of history to say, has anything like this happened before? No, it hasn't. Okay, well, here's some then and now photography that points back to what Ezekiel said, that points back to what Zechariah said in chapter 8. And is this what's happening? And making those connections. So for me, again, it's not so much about speculating of what's coming, but this is what's coming now, knowing if God is fulfilling his word down to the detail right now with these things, then that helps us look ahead of what actually is coming.
That's right.
So in other words, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, what I'm saying is that to me, what that's demonstrating is God is faithful to his word. He's doing exactly what he said that he would, and we're happen to live in a time and a season where we're actually living in biblical times that the prophets foretold.
Oh gosh, I mean, really, this is such a timely book, for our day. And I was going to say, you're not going to see a book like this about Hinduism. Not going to see a book like this about Islam, because there are no ancient prophecies that have been fulfilled to the exact word and letter as Jesus said they would be. Okay, getting to specifically now Jerusalem here. Were there places that you thought, man, we've got to find, what this looked like years ago? Did you always begin with the previous pick, or did you see something in Jerusalem you thought, I wonder if there's anything related to that in the past? Did you kind of go retro?
No, I exclusively stuck to the old photos as a guide, because I mean there's a lot of really beautiful things in Jerusalem that you can see the advancement of, but I wanted to be able to find the oldest possible, and then document what somebody else had documented as a baseline to show the growth on that.
Really cool.
So, again, sometimes people say, I wish you would have taken a picture of this or taken a picture of that. And I'm like, well, I didn't have an old picture of this or that.
We just show the now, but not the then, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Get your time machine, go back and take that ancient picture.
Well, on that, did you find that when you went now to the modern day equivalent, did you find that some of it was partially buried or obscured, or that type of, or some photos you just couldn't find, or?
Yeah, I mean, there was. I write about it in Jerusalem Rising, in one of the personal encounters in the old city. I was struggling to find a couple of these angles that I was just running out of time. We contacted the City of David archaeological dig, and I was asking questions, and they were like, "You need this particular guide. He knows everything." I gave him a call, and he happened to have a 3 or 4 hour window at the exact perfect time that I needed. I sent him like 4 or 5 photos of just all over, just from the 1850s to the 1890s, like old stuff that I had no idea. He emails me back in 10 minutes, and he's like, "Well, this one you can't see anymore because and this was torn down, or that one's a great angle. I can take you here, but so I'd like there's people in Jerusalem that knew this stuff that we like the guide's guide of some of these sites." So
that's just amazing.
Again, I'm having images of like Indiana Jones in my head.
It was, man.
What
it was
a cool
so fun.
journey it must have been.
It was so fun, and we shot the entire book of Jerusalem Rising in about 5 or 6 days, and we averaged about. I mean, if any of your listeners have ever been to Jerusalem, I mean, there's nowhere to drive. You're walking everywhere.
Right.
So we averaged probably 9 to 10 miles a day of just looking and hiking and pulling out iPads and figuring out where are we and what's going on. And so it was a blast.
Got your gym time in those days.
Yeah, right. That's awesome, man. So cool.
Well, when you think of what are some of a lot of our listeners are honestly first time people who are first engaging with Bible prophecy, just realizing how compelling it is as an apologetic that the Bible's the only religious founding book that has prophecy and connects it to God's character and God's authority. It's one of the things that led me to Christ, was the apologetic of fulfilled prophecy. So as you think about Jerusalem Rising, what are like 1 or 2 of the most compelling prophecies that you would tell maybe first-time prophecy students? These are some really compelling prophecies that just jumped out at me as I was doing this book.
Yeah, really, for both Jerusalem Rising and Israel Rising, like we talked about, there's no other people group that has any of those types of ancient writings. Yeah. And during the time that the Jewish people were out of the land, Jerusalem included, the land and the city was desolate. And so the ancient prophecy that we're looking at in Jerusalem Rising is from Zechariah 8, when it talks about the old men and old women will dwell again in the streets, and children will play. And there's always been old men and women and people living in Jerusalem, but it speaks of a time of safety and prosperity that the world has really never seen before. And then that chapter ends by talking about how that the nations are going to come to the Jew and say, like, please be my friend, I know God is with you. And it talks about this time when there's Gentile Christians or Gentiles coming to the Jewish people saying, we want to follow you and connect with you. Now, why that's significant is really for the first time ever in history in the last 20 to 30 years, never before, and we're really in the midst of it now, we're seeing it certainly within like the evangelical community, just this large drawing of people saying, well, I need to learn a little bit more about the roots of my faith. Well, wait, Jesus was Jewish, like, and the disciples, and like, I took a trip, and now I went to Israel, now my Bible reads completely different, I got to get in a little bit more. Never before has any, like in the last 2,000 years, never before has there been that type of turning, and that's exactly what Ezekiel 8 talks about, and Jerusalem is a significant place in that. So, when we talk about the revival of Jerusalem in the city, it's not, we joke about it and say, it's people aren't just planting gardens just to make it look better or fixing up some buildings. I mean, this is all going somewhere. Like Jerusalem is being restored for the first time in thousands of years, and it's not just to make the city look pretty again. It's all, if we continue reading in Zechariah, there's a Messiah that puts his feet on the Mount of Olives, and he enters a Jewish Jerusalem to defend his people. There's a Jewish Jerusalem now for the first time in a couple thousand years. Like, hey guys, like, what do you think's coming next?
And they maintain their identity for over 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years of being away.
That in itself is an anomaly in human history.
Rebirth their language that had gone dead, the whole thing.
That's right.
So on some of these photographs in Jerusalem, you mentioned the Mount of Olives. I'm thinking about things that have still future, obviously, prophetic significance. The Temple Mount, that type of thing. Was there one or two maybe experiences, those personal encounters that were very spiritual to you? I mean, it's kind of like God really connecting with you in this moment, kind of thing.
Yeah, there was one in particular, and it's connected to one of the oldest photos of Jerusalem in 1844. There was this French photographer who, back in the 1840s, he's learning this brand new style of photography, and he goes on this adventure from 1840 to 1844, all through what we now would know as Israel and Syria and Lebanon and Egypt, and he's doing these what's called daguerreotype photography on these plates. Again, huge trunks and cumbersome equipment. But in 1844, he's in Jerusalem, and he takes this shot, and I've got it in the book. He takes a shot of just the landscape of the old city, and what he didn't know is that a complete world away in 1844, there's an Ottoman Sultan who is trying to revive the Ottoman Empire and update some things. And in 1844, he orders a census of the whole Ottoman Empire, which includes Jerusalem. So here these two men never know each other, worlds and worlds apart, in 1844, talking about how God makes things collide to prep for us. We now, and you can see it in the book, there is photographs of what Jerusalem looks like in 1844 when the census says there's only 15,000 people in it.
Wow.
So for us, we actually found that, I'm 99% sure that this is like the rock outcropping where this guy set up his gear to take the photo 175 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And to me, why that was special is that this was taken in 1844. It wasn't until 30 years later that some major Jewish immigration began coming. So it's almost like God gave us this baseline of saying, before there's this massive influx of Jewish people from all around the world, let me show you where we're starting. And so to me, it was my love for history. I kind of geeked out on that little
sure. Absolutely.
But one of the most repeated promises in the scripture is God will bring his people back to the land. And I felt like that in 1844, God's using these two men to give us a baseline of this is what the city looked like before I begin fulfilling my word. And right now, I mean, that was, again, we mentioned it's well over 1 million people in Jerusalem now. I mean, and the city is just
the land has exploded.
It really
lush.
is. It really is. It's amazing.
Well, in the same way, Todd, with archaeological evidence for the authenticity, the veracity of the scriptures. I mean, every time an archaeologist's spade uncovers a mound of dirt, it proves the scripture to be true. I mean, the things that people doubted back in the Old Testament, the Hittites weren't in existence. They didn't have language writing back then. They didn't use camels or whatever it might be. But it's all been proved. They recently found, I think, was a coin with David. The King David was mentioned on this coin. Just all these things that just proved. Now, what we have here is photographic evidence of that. Basically saying this is what the land was like, this is what this looked like then, and this is what God prophesied would happen. Now we have actual photographs of it happening. You don't have to go to Jerusalem necessarily to see these things. You can buy this book and go there, virtually, I guess you would say, to be able to see some of these incredible sights. And to me, that just exalts God, Doug, doesn't it? I mean, doesn't it just lift up Jesus and just how authentic, how trustworthy he is?
Yeah, and if we'd look back 100 years ago and believers reading some of the prophets about Israel, I could understand why they might say, well, maybe that doesn't really mean Israel, maybe it means this, maybe it means that. But if the nation of Israel has shown us anything in the last 73 years, is that God knows exactly what he's doing. Yeah. He's doing exactly what he said, and he told us exactly what this was going to be coming.
That's right.
And so it's coming in a very tangible and very literal way. And so to me, that just like what you said, it just demonstrates the faithfulness of who God is.
I love it. To me, these books are a neon sign to the world. Don't bypass Israel. Yeah. Don't think it's an accident of geopolitics. This was all prophesied in the Old Testament by every Old Testament prophet except for Jonah. This is something. I mean, for the Christians, it's a flashing neon light. Pay attention to this. So I thank you for writing this book. It is amazing. Both books are amazing. So thanks for. I know it's blood, sweat, and tears and inspiration. But we thank you for putting the hard work in. It's a great resource.
Now I know we're a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but is there anything left?
There's always stuff left, my man. Yeah, so the Ancient Prophecy Modern Lens series, I'm working on book 3. Israel Rising 1, Jerusalem Rising 2. So the next one, I've all of the research has already been done, but that's going to be called Aliyah Rising, which is the word Aliyah is about the Jewish people returning. So prior to COVID, I had done over 30 interviews with the founders of the state of Israel to get sort of their Aliyah stories.
Nice.
And so from 19 different countries, from 5 different continents, and so I have all that content, and I'm putting that together as well.
And now even Ukrainians are flying.
No doubt about it. I mean, this is something that we're going to be talking about for really from now on. This morning at the Israel Prayer Breakfast, they're talking about the rise of anti-Semitism. Right now is worldwide, or is at levels that have exceeded World War II. Right now. And so when we're talking about God bringing His people home, it's going to be a topic that we'll be talking about next year here.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
That's right.
Well, it just highlights the sovereignty of God, how He uses something horrific like the Holocaust to bring about the rebirth of the nation Israel. And ever since then, as you said, I mean, there's been anti-Semitism that's been on a constant ramp up, and now Jews are continuing to return to the Holy Land, back to Jerusalem, back to Israel. And again, it just fulfills. We're actually literally seeing fulfilled prophecy every time someone steps off that plane.
And what's amazing too, and for your listeners that may have never been or haven't have a lot of experience there, the nation of Israel today is primarily a secular nation. A lot of the Jews that are returning aren't because they're answering some call. A lot of them are just saying, I don't even know why I want to come, but it feels like home here, and this is where I belong. And there's no like spiritual renaissance or revival yet. There will be. Ezekiel says he's going to bring them all together and then pour out his Spirit.
That's right. I was going to say, and there's some hints in Ezekiel 36 where they'll come back first in disbelief.
Exactly.
And all in prep for all the end time.
So the fact that God is bringing a bunch of Israelis together that don't know their history or don't know their God or don't even care, that's exactly what Ezekiel said would happen.
It's amazing.
Well, listen, if you're a Prophecy Pros fan, then you're going to be a Doug Hershey fan, because we're Doug Hershey fans, okay? And this book is, we talk so much on this program about how we want to give you clarity and confidence and hope and strengthen your faith. This is a book that will strengthen your faith. It will give you more of a sense of how God has worked throughout history. And I'm talking to some men out there, Todd, who say, I don't read books too much. Listen, you're going to read this book.
It'll suck you in.
There are a lot of pictures in this thing, which men always love, right? Yeah. And so I want to encourage people to go out and get a copy of Jerusalem Rising, Ancient Prophecy, Modern Lens. Doug Hershey, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come talk to the Prophecy Pros.
Thanks, guys. This was fun.
Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely.
And one quick question, where can people find out about you, your ministry, and these books? Where can they pick them up?
2 websites. You can go to my home website, doughershey.co.
Okay.
My travel company is EzraAdventures.com. We do trips exploring biblical lands, Israel, Jordan, Turkey, that kind of thing.
Nice.
But really anywhere books are sold, Amazon, anything, you can find it on any of those sites.
Fantastic. Well, again, we're here at National Religious Broadcasters Convention. That's the chatter in the background. And we want to thank Harvest House Publishers for sponsoring this podcast and the booth that we're in here. And thank you for all the support that they give us. Most of all, we thank you guys for listening and for spreading the word about the Prophecy Pros podcast. We'll talk to you next time.